Dante's Divine Comedy, the Inferno, Cantos 9 and 10. Dante is a poet, the greatest of all poets. And as a poet, he knows how to focus the attention of his readers on any particular point which he wants to emphasize. And one of the ways he does that is through the use of contrast. Now, at the end of Canto 8, we saw him and Virgil engaging in something that to us seems rather hilarious and puerile at the same time. What happened was Dante was confronted by Filippo d'Argenti, who was responsible for him being deprived of all his material possessions. And in a fit of spite, Dante wanted to avenge himself by wishing that Filippo d'Argenti should be stuffed further down in the swamp, which was the punishment of those in the fifth circle, the circle of the wrathful. And Virgil gladly obliges, but at the same time, Virgil does something that seems to be somewhat uncharacteristic of both of them. And that is, he adopts a very maternal, shall we say, attitude towards Dante, patting him on his cheeks and reassuring him as a mother would reassure her child. And we see this in Canto 8, verse 40 to 42. Virgil stretched both his hands out toward the boat, at which my master quickly shoved him back, saying, he stretched both his hands out toward the boat, at which my master quickly shoved him back, saying, be off there with the other dogs. That done, he threw his arms around my neck and kissed my face and said, indignant soul, blessed is she who bore you in her womb. Now, these seems somewhat flippant and frivolous. Dante says that Virgil reassured him, wanted to sort of console him, soothe away his resentment, his anger, his pique, as one would say. And that's why Virgil refers to him as an indignant soul. But at the same time, Virgil uses the same words that a woman in the Gospels addressed to Jesus himself when she said to him, having admired and being impressed with what Jesus had said and done, blessed is the womb that bore you. And Virgil applies these words to Dante himself. It sounds somewhat blasphemous and somewhat, it sounds like a caricature of what was written in the Gospels. But I think the explanation for that is Virgil is simply trying to help Dante to shift his focus away from the unpleasant nature of the encounter he had with Filippo d'Argenti. And to that end and for that purpose, he uses these words from scripture to give Dante back a sense of his own dignity, almost as if to say, by indulging in his spite, Dante had lowered himself somehow to the same level as those who were being tormented in that fifth circle of hell. And Virgil, at the same time, was trying to cajole Dante back by kissing him and patting his cheeks and saying that you shouldn't be like that. Blessed is the womb that bore you. Blessed is she who bore you in her womb, meaning to say, be mindful of the dignity that you should have as a poet and as a human being. You are not like, Virgil is saying to Dante, you are not like these people, you know, they have sunk low, they have become like beasts and animals because of their vices, but you are not like them. You are a human being, and one could say very probably your mother was a noble woman, and being born of her, you should have some of that nobility as well. All this seems somewhat out of step and seems to have deviated from the structure of the narrative. But, and as I said, it seems somewhat puerile, hilarious as it may be, flippant, frivolous, very out of character of the gravitas that is expected of Virgil and Dante. But we will see the point of it all when we realize, when we see what happens next as Virgil and Dante approach the city of Dis, which is the region of hell that lies deeper than the previous 5 circles. And it is a region of hell where the torments are really, really, really more horrendous than what Virgil and Dante had witnessed until then. And Dante begins to speak of a feeling of panic and of fear. He says this again at the end of Canto 8. Canto 8 stands as line 94. They approach the city of Dis, which is the region of what is called nether hell, or the lower regions of hell. And what they see is are the walls of the city, which are like iron, which give the impression of being made of iron, and not just iron, but iron in the fire. It is red hot iron, the walls of the city of Dis. And around the walls of the city, on the ramparts in front at the gates of the city, there are the demons and the centaurs, creatures who are not fully human, part beast, part human as well. And as Virgil and Dante approach, Virgil tells Dante to wait for him at a distance because he was going to parley with these creatures to obtain entrance into the city. And those creatures, of course, refused entrance to Dante because he was still alive. He was not a damned soul, so to speak. He was still a human being. But the moment Virgil leaves his side and Dante hears the demons speaking out against him, he is filled with dismay, terror. He is horrified. And this is the contrast here. Before, in the fifth circle, he and Virgil had engaged in that moment of puerile hilarity, one could say. But now it has swung to another extreme, from being puerile, flippant, frivolous in that hilarious incident. Now he is horrified. He panics. He is filled with great fear, anguish, and distress, because now he is confronted by this spectacle of the walls of the city of Dis, red hot iron, demons refusing him entry, Virgil having left him even though for a moment. And Dante is simply not laughing anymore. He's not sorry. He's not spiteful anymore, and he is not petty anymore. On the contrary, he is filled with great fear. So we can understand the incident in Canto 8 in the light of what followed, of the episode that follows, that we are going to see in Canto 9 at the moment. Dante describes the city of Dis, which is the lower region of hell, and we can see that he has taken much of the description from Virgil himself, who has described the city of Dis in Book 6 of the Aeneid. However, Dante has amplified Virgil's own description. In Book 6 of the Aeneid, Virgil mentions the city of Dis only in passing, because his hero, Aeneas, in that book, does not go to Hades in order to enter that city of Dis. He only goes down into what we call the netherworld, the underworld, the Hades, hell, in order to go forward to the region of Elysium, which is the place where the righteous did abide. Virgil only describes the city in passing. And this description, Virgil takes over this description into his description in the Inferno. But it makes you wonder, if Dante does this, whether there is any authenticity to the whole narrative at all, and not just the city of Dis, but everything else in the Inferno. It seems to be taken, Dante seems to have borrowed, plucked all these descriptions from other sources. And one comes to the conclusion that very probably this is all a literary invention. Dante is making it up. But I would say he didn't really go, some would say he's really making it up. He didn't really go through hell. He's just imagining it. I would say rather that probably he would have an experience akin, analogous to going through hell. How he was going to describe it or give an account of that experience was another matter. He wanted to give an account of that experience in a way that would be helpful to his readers. He just didn't want to say it as it is, but he wanted to say something about it that would help his readers in their moral growth and development. And for that reason, he takes descriptions from other sources and inserts it into his narrative in order to tell us something that is hidden beneath each and every detail and element of that narrative. The city of Dis, for example, yes, it is there in ancient classical mythology as well. Virgil, as I've mentioned, describes it in Book 6 of the Aeneid, and his description too is partly taken from Homer, who also describes it in the Odyssey when he describes, he tells how Ulysses himself had to go down into the underworld. But all these mythological elements Dante employs because he wants to say something about the human mind. We should realize by now that Dante uses a description, he utilizes his belief and probably his experience of an eschatological hell, as Christians would believe in, to give a description of a psychological hell that many people go through and many people will persist in unless they make a resolution to come out of it and change. And given that, we can understand this description of the city of Dis as an allegory, so to speak, or a metaphor, if you wish, of the human psyche that has become hardened in resistance to what is true and what is good. The city of Dis, therefore, represents the human psyche that has become hard and cold like iron, or I would say it has become as hard as iron, as tough, as solid as iron, but at the same time, it is red hot iron because that human mind that has become like this is somehow persists in that hardness, in that obduracy, one could say, is hardened in that obduracy because of certain prejudices within oneself, certain dispositions within oneself that are negative, that are not helpful to oneself or to others at all. It could be resentment, it could be unforgiveness, it could be spite, it could be malice, it could be bigotry, it could be fanaticism, it could be any human feeling or emotion or disposition which a person uses consciously or unconsciously to animate and to keep alive a certain ideology within himself or herself that is resistant to truth, to reality, to all that is good, to all that is noble, to all that is conducive to human growth and development, both for oneself and for others. In short, it's the obduracy, the hardness of heart, the willful rejection and resistance of grace, one could say. And the fact that Dante and Virgil have difficulty in entering the city of Dis shows also how, Dorothy Sayers puts it very beautifully in a commentary, it shows how this obduracy has become so solid, so tough, that not even the beauty and goodness of the arts and the sciences, poetry, literature, science, the liberal arts can present anything. Neither of these things can present anything to such a mind that would help it to change, to improve, to leave behind this situation of obduracy in order to open itself once more up, open up itself once more to the things that would really help it to improve himself, to become better, to become more human. And that is why Virgil has a problem in his encounter with the demons at the gates. And these demons, and eventually we see in Canto 9 as well, there are also these horrific creatures, the harpies, the gorgons, the centaurs, all these creatures from ancient mythology as well. What do they represent? They represent thoughts, moods, feelings within oneself. And just as these creatures are part human and part beast, they represent thoughts, moods, and feelings that are perverse, not normal, not natural, not part and parcel of human nature. Thoughts like revenge, thoughts of vindictiveness, thoughts of oppression, thoughts of violence, thoughts of hatred, thoughts of destruction. all these are represented by these creatures, half human and half beast, who, of course, pose an obstacle and a resistance to every effort to improve, change, upgrade, elevate the human mind above all this negativity to something better, something more wholesome. And then in Canto 9, we see that this impasse between Dante and Virgil on the one hand, and the demons and the harpies and the gate and the creatures at the gates of the city of Dis on the other hand, cannot be resolved except by grace, the action of God. And this grace is represented by this beautiful creature of light who comes across the swamp and simply imperiously tells the demons off and opens the gates of the city of Dis to let Virgil and Dante enter. And this is the action of grace. And this is true. Very often, nothing can get through to a person in a situation like this. No amount of therapy, no amount of counseling, no amount of nagging, no amount of haranguing, no amount of encouragement, no amount of threatening will get through to such a person. But the grace of God, yes. Those of you may have come across such examples in your own lives of people whom you had given up for good, whom you had given up as lost. But the next thing you know, you meet them and they have changed for the better, and that is the work of grace. Canto 10, Dante and Virgil now enter into the sixth circle of hell. And this is at the very entrance of the gates of the city, at the very entrance of the city of Dis. And here they come into the circle of heretics, where those who are being punished or tormented here are being punished and tormented for heresy. And the punishment is that they are entombed, they are buried in deep tombs, fiery tombs, fires. There's fire that comes out of these tombs and surround these tombs as well. What is heresy actually? People speak of heresy, and the two heretics within open inverted commas that Dante speaks of here, Farinata degli Uberti and Cavalcante dei Cavalcanti. When you look at them, they were not actually heretics. They were poets. They were men of letters. They wrote beautiful things and beautiful words and beautiful imagery and so on. And you wonder what the heresy is in that. Of course, for Christians, heresy literally means aberrant beliefs, beliefs that are contrary, a departure from the norm of Christian doctrine, belief in something that is completely opposite and contrary to what is being taught in the Bible and what is being taught by the Catholic Church. Dante's concept of heresy in this circle is much wider. For him, heresy is simply any aberration, any departure from truth and reality in general, not just Christian doctrine, but the reality of life. And this is evident from the two characters, one can say, he meets in this circle, Farinata and Cavalcante. Now, as I said, they did not appear to be heretics when they were alive, but some commentators said that the only heresy that they would have subscribed to, these two, Farinata and Cavalcante, was simply the heresy, well, I won't call it heresy, it was simply Epicureanism. They seem to have subscribed to the teaching of Epicurus and his disciples, who were Stoics. But the thing about Epicurus, and I think here Dante may have given a rather the commentators of Dante may have given a very narrow perspective on the teaching of Epicurus, whom they allege to have taught that the only thing worth living for in this life is pleasure. In other words, Epicurus was a hedonist. Epicureanism is hedonism. But this is a half-truth. Epicurus speaks of the pleasures of the senses, yes, but only as helpful to the higher pleasures of the mind when it is engaged in the search for truth. Nevertheless, the commentators here speak of Farinata and Cavalcante as being Epicureans in that sense, because they were more interested in the pleasures of poetry, and very often it was love poetry. And Cavalcante himself was the father of Guido di Cavalcanti, who was Dante's mentor in the composition of the sonnets that he would later publish in the Vita Nuova. And this was what they seem to have been, this was the heresy that they seem to have been guilty of. Dante, however, would say that the heresy that everyone here is guilty of is the heresy of simply not accepting the reality of life and truth itself. Farinata and Cavalcante, if at all, since they are being alleged of being Epicureans, subscribing to the pleasure principle as the ultimate purpose of life, would therefore be heretics within open inverted commas, because the reality of life is simply no one lives for pleasure alone. The reality of life is people live for other noble ideals as well, bravery, nobility, to do heroic deeds, for example. There will, of course, be no pleasure in such things, but there will be something much better than pleasure, which is fame, honor, glory, which is what some people look for in life, and not just pleasure. Yeah? And I would say heresy here also is simply the refusal, the deliberate refusal to accept truth and reality in any form whatsoever. And the result is, when a person turns his back on reality, he entombs himself, he buries himself, he closes in on himself. Not wanting to accept the truth and reality, he dies to himself. In his own mind, in his own heart, he closes in on himself. He erects a barrier through which no one can get through. The barrier of doubt, one could say, skepticism, cynicism, one could say. And these are the walls of the tomb in which heretic, in the broad sense that we are talking of here, buries himself. And there is fire because the heretic, in this sense, nurses his doubts, his skepticism, his cynicism with a lot of, as I've mentioned, scorn, contempt, spite also, one could say, a lot of pride, a lot of conceit, arrogance, that simply animates, feeds his closure to the truth all the more. He feeds his illusion, so to speak, on all these negativity, and he is buried there. And another punishment for these heretics is that because they refuse to know the truth as it is, the knowledge itself, the faculty of knowledge itself, the ability to know itself, the ability itself to know is being withdrawn from them in hell. And this comes to light towards the end of Canto 10, where Dante, having surmised that the souls there had some knowledge of the future, asks Farinata whether they have any knowledge at all of what is happening in the world, both of the present as well as of what will happen in the future in the world outside. And Farinata says that they may have some faint knowledge of what goes on, what is about to happen in the world, but they have no knowledge of what is presently happening in the world. And this goes to show that the knowledge that they could have used to know the truth and reality of things is being diminished bit by bit. And eventually they'll end up with knowing nothing but either the past, the sinful past, and the present in hell. And this is what Farinata says in Canto 10, line 100. We see even as men who are far-sighted those things that are remote from us. The highest Lord allots us that much light. But when events draw near or are, our minds are useless. Were we not informed by others, we should know nothing of your human state. So you can understand how our awareness will die completely at the moment when the portal of the future has been shut. They refuse to know the truth in the present. And therefore, that knowledge of the truth in the present is being taken away from them. Like everyone else, they could have some knowledge of the future. We ourselves too can have some knowledge of the future. We can make some prognosis, we can make some prediction, and very accurate ones at that, because of certain signs, certain indications in the present. We can definitely make not just a conjecture, but a definite, certain prediction of what's going to happen in the future. We are capable of that as well. And so are these people in the sixth circle of hell. But they say they know it only dimly, meaning to say it's fading. And all this knowledge of the future, of the present, is slowly fading away from them. Then the knowledge of the future is like some dim horizon, dim light on the horizon, which is fading, like the evening light. And once that goes, then it's all darkness. Even the present itself will not be known at all. And this is the punishment for one who refuses to accept the truth or reality. Whatever knowledge he or she has, whatever ability to know that he or she has, will even be taken away from him, so that all that he has left is memory and illusions. And here Dante also says, and I think this is somewhat not relevant to the context, but as he leaves Farinata and Cavalcante, he's somewhat upset, puzzled, because he says, if they can know something of the future, perhaps they can tell me something about my future as well. And he mentions this to Virgil, but Virgil says, no, they will not tell you about your future. If you want to know about your future, you have to go to purgatory first. And it is there that Beatrice will tell you. And this is true. We can have no knowledge about ourselves, about what lies ahead of us, as long as we have this state of illusion within our minds and our hearts. We need to burst the bubble, or someone needs to burst the bubble for us. Then we will know it. But to burst that bubble, we need to move away from that situation whereby one has become entrenched somewhat in vice, and to move away from that, and the clouds clear away and one can see. Thank you.